At some point in the last 100,000 years, you shared this planet with at least 5 other kinds of human. Not distant ancestors. Not evolutionary stepping stones. Actual humans. Different species of the genus Homo, walking the same ground, breathing the same air, looking up at the same stars. Some of them buried their dead. Some of them made jewelry. Some of them cared for their sick and injured across years. They were not primitive. They were not animals. They were people. And they are gone. The story of what happened to them is one of the most consequential mysteries in all of science. And the answer, pieced together from bones and genes and tools buried in the dirt, is far stranger and more uncomfortable than most people realize. You know about Neanderthals. You have probably heard the word your entire life, usually as a synonym for something brutish or slow. That version of the Neanderthal is almost entirely wrong. Neanderthals had brains as large as yours, sometimes larger. They lived in Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years, which makes modern humans look like a very recent experiment by comparison. They hunted large game cooperatively. They made pigments and applied them to their bodies and possibly to cave walls. They placed flowers, or at least pollen, in the graves of their dead. They survived ice ages. They were not failures. They were extraordinarily successful for an extraordinarily long time. And then, roughly 40,000 years ago, they disappeared. Paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum in London has spent his career trying to understand what happened. The evidence now points towards something more complicated than simple replacement or sudden extinction. The Neanderthals did not vanish all at once. They faded. Population by population, region by region, over thousands of years. And during that long fade, something else was happening that was not discovered until 2010, when a team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute succeeded in sequencing the first complete Neanderthal genome. What they found changed everything. You are not fully modern human. If your ancestry is non-African, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA came directly from Neanderthals. Your ancestors did not just encounter Neanderthals. They had children with them. The two groups met, competed, and also merged, in the most literal biological sense possible. Neanderthal DNA survives today in hundreds of millions of living people, shaping immune responses, affecting skin and hair, influencing how certain genes express themselves. The Neanderthals are not entirely gone. They are partially you. But Neanderthals were not the only others. In 2008, in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, researchers found a small bone fragment from the finger of a young girl. The bone was old but not extraordinary looking. What was extraordinary was what came out of it. When geneticists analyzed the ancient DNA, they found it did not match modern humans and it did not match Neanderthals. It was something else entirely. A previously unknown group of archaic humans that had never been described by science. They were named the Denisovans, after the cave where the fragment was found. The Denisovans remain almost entirely mysterious. We have found their DNA but almost nothing of their physical remains. A finger bone. A few teeth. A fragment of a jaw discovered in Tibet. From these scraps of evidence, scientists have established that Denisovans ranged across an enormous territory, from Siberia to Southeast Asia to possibly the Pacific. And like the Neanderthals, they left their DNA in modern humans. People in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians carry up to 5% Denisovan ancestry. Tibetan populations carry a Denisovan gene variant that allows them to survive at high altitudes that would be fatal to most people. A gift from a people we cannot even fully describe, still functioning in living bodies today. And there were others still. Homo floresiensis, discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003, was a tiny human species standing only about a meter tall, with a brain a third the size of yours, yet sophisticated enough to make stone tools and possibly hunt dwarf elephants. They survived until at least 50,000 years ago, possibly later, which means they almost certainly encountered modern humans. Homo luzonensis, found in the Philippines in 2019, adds yet another branch to a family tree that keeps growing more complicated the more we look at it. Homo naledi, found in South Africa, challenges our assumptions about burial behavior and ritualized treatment of the dead in ways that science is still working to fully interpret. What does it mean that all of these people existed? And what does it mean that they are gone? The old story was simple. Modern humans emerged from Africa, moved outward, and replaced everyone they encountered because they were smarter, more adaptable, more creative. The others could not compete. They died out. Modern humans won. The new story is much harder to tell cleanly. Yes, modern humans spread rapidly and yes, the other species disappeared. But the relationship between those two facts is not simple cause and effect. The interbreeding evidence tells us that these were not encounters between utterly alien species. They were encounters between groups that were different enough to be distinct species by some definitions but similar enough to produce viable offspring. The lines between us and them were blurry in ways that matter. What killed the Neanderthals? Climate change certainly played a role. The end of the last ice age reshaped their habitat dramatically. Disease may have played a role, as modern humans moving into new territories often carry pathogens that populations with no exposure to those pathogens cannot survive. Competition for resources almost certainly played a role. And perhaps violence. There is evidence, contested but real, of Neanderthal remains bearing marks consistent with human-inflicted injury. The truth is probably all of these things, operating together across thousands of years in different proportions in different places at different times. There was no single moment when the Neanderthals ended. There were probably individual Neanderthals alive long after most of their kind were gone, living in shrinking pockets of suitable habitat, their numbers too small to sustain. A species does not end with a battle. It ends with a last birth that produces no surviving descendants. What makes this story so strange to sit with is not the science. It is the implications. At some point, a modern human and a Neanderthal looked at each other across whatever distance separated them and made a choice that resulted in a child. That child was real. It had a face and a name in whatever language its parents spoke. It lived a life. It had descendants. Some of those descendants are alive today. The boundary between us and them was never as sharp as the category of species implies. We did not replace the Neanderthals entirely. We absorbed some of them. And all the others, the Denisovans and the Floriensis and the Luzonensis and the Naledi and the ones we have not found yet, they were each a complete world. Hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, language, story, skill, relationship, memory. All of it gone. Not lost gradually like a language falling out of use, but ended. Each one a world that closed. You carry some of that world inside you. 1 to 4% of your genome contains the echoes of people who watched the same sunsets you watch and felt the cold of the same winters and looked at the stars without knowing what they were. They could not have imagined that their genes would still be here, still working, still shaping human life, tens of thousands of years after the last of them died. But they are. And you are walking proof that the story of humanity was never a single line moving forward. It was always a web, branching and tangling and crossing itself in ways we are only beginning to understand. The humans who came before us did not simply disappear. Some of them became part of us. And the rest left a silence that science is still trying to hear. At some point in the last 100,000 years, you shared this planet with at least 5 other kinds of human. And somewhere in your blood, the faintest trace of them is still here.